Just do it. It'll turn out okay.
Hey.
To not only my 400th episode on this channel
Yay.
podcast, but
Yay!
also we're talking about a very important topic today.
Yeah.
But first, for those of you out there who may not know who these two women are, introduce yourselves.
I guess I'll go first. Maya Adkison. You can find me at Maya Adkison. Usually go live every Sunday from 9:30 to 11:30 Eastern time. We do debunking science misinformation in a comedic way. So come through.
I'm Jillian. I've been on the show a few times. Some of you might also have seen my son do his first ever debate a couple of weeks ago. I'm very proud of him still. Mostly I write about movies for a volunteer site. We're hoping to get the Media Magpie site up and going soon, but we'll keep everybody posted on that.
If you want to support either of these ladies or myself, their links are down in the description below. Maya's YouTube channel, Jillian and mine's Patreon, and our Amazon Wish link. And we also, in the chat below, chat on the side, we have some tips. You want to leave us a nice little bonus. Don't have to, but every bit helps. Just kidding. But anyways, so we talked about this last year. We talked about the 13th Amendment. What's the difference between this and the 13th Amendment?
Well, this is purely based on Abraham Lincoln's war powers. This is, and this is a phrase that's going to be really familiar after the last, decade or so. This is an executive order.
Yeah.
And what's really important, and we'll get into this, is what this didn't cover. Because the Emancipation Proclamation solely covered slavery in territories that were in rebellion when it was made official.
So not the, quote, border states.
Right, exactly.
The
Confederate border states were still slaves.
But since they were loyal Union slaves, that was okay.
Yeah,
exactly.
If you bent the knee, you could keep your slaves.
To be fair to Lincoln, he was a staunch abolitionist. Like, there are people who will dispute that fact, but if you read his pre-war writing, the man did not like slavery, kids.
I mean, personally, sure.
Yeah, politically, he didn't think he had the authority.
Right. Well, he didn't. It was in the Constitution.
He absolutely didn't have the authority.
Right.
And he did believe that eventually slavery was going to have to be abolished because the country couldn't, house divided against itself cannot stand and all of that.
Right.
Yeah, there was
a
thing there's a thing that they didn't even want to technically at the time abolish slavery. They just don't want it to expand anymore. If you cut the slaves where you were in the States, you already had, that's fine, you don't care. But you can't go into other states anymore.
Part of how all this went down was not being able to expand.
Yeah. Abolition and slavery were not a binary.
Right.
Like, that is a false dichotomy that we today have set on slavery. There were abolitionists, and there were passionate slave owners, and then there was a whole range of other positions from slave owners who thought slavery was wrong, but not wrong enough to stop having slaves.
Right.
Which is the weirdest position, in my opinion. The longest speech given at the Constitutional Convention about the evils of slavery was given by one of the largest slave owners in the Constitutional Convention. And, I guess he knew, but... And then you got people who wanted slavery to stay in the slave states, and you got people who wanted slavery to be abolished, but didn't want black people to actually be able to go places.
Right.
That would be
like the state of Oregon banned black people.
That'd be like the ship them back to Africa hypothesis they had.
Ship them back to Africa, make them stay in the South.
Yeah, Lincoln entertained all of this, by the way.
Yeah, oh yeah, no. Like, it's so funny to me because from the Southern perspective, the Civil War was absolutely about slavery.
Yes,
Like,
100%.
if you read the original documents, they're
Oh no,
really open about
yeah,
that.
it was all about slavery. Like we like our slaves, we want our slaves, we're not giving up our slaves, GFY.
Right,
And they
but from the
actually gave,
Northern perspective,
yeah, the northern perspective was just we want to keep our country together.
exactly.
And I think if the southern states had said, okay, we won't succeed, but we want to keep our slaves, I think Lincoln would have been down for
Yeah,
to talk,
they
and a lot of that
started.
could have happened.
Yeah, a
They,
lot of anti-slavery people weren't abolitionists immediately. A lot of them wanted to do something called gradual thing, like
Yes.
yeah,
pay the slaves off, pay the owners off, so they can't buy their
yeah.
freedom or.
The children of slaves would no longer be slaves. There was a
Right.
whole bunch of
Yep.
positions in that department too. But in the modern day, we're like, no, it was a binary. There were abolitionists
Right.
and there were
Yeah.
slave owners, and there was nothing
No.
in between.
There's absolutely not. No, we don't teach. We whitewash slavery so badly that
Oh yeah,
there's no reason for people to think that there was anything else.
It's
yeah.
funny. I'm from Ohio, a northern state, and I am so surprised at how many people I went to school with think the Civil War was about states' rights still.
In Ohio?
Yes.
Oh wow.
So I'm from California, free state. Nobody remembers that we were a free state, but California became a state in 1850, which is a little before the Civil War.
Mhm.
I currently live in Washington State, still a territory at the time.
Mhm.
Free territory, but still a territory. And when I was in college, I took a course on the U.S. South. Full year course. And for their final project one quarter, some friends, this is how long ago this was, checked out a camera from Media Loan, because that was how you got your hands on a camcorder in that day. And went around to various places in our area asking people basic questions about the Civil War. Name 5 slave states, name 5 free states, who was the president of the Confederacy, and seeing who could answer and who couldn't.
Mhm.
And the one question they played this film for our class, and the question they asked that got the biggest reaction from my class was they asked what the Confederate flag stands for, because that was a very big debate. This was 99. A very big current day debate at that time. And the answer that I will never forget the exact wording of was, I don't know, but it looks really good on a red pickup truck.
What?
That was what the guy said the Confederate flag stood for. He didn't know, but it looked really good on a red pickup truck. And my entire class just groaned.
Well, I don't know about Naya, but you and me grew up in the 80s and the 70s for the time of the Dukes of Hazzard car
Yes.
situation.
And I have no doubt.
We were born in the same year.
Yeah, now I'm the elder in the group. I was born in 76, so.
Oh, you're so old.
I'm ancient. I really am. But yeah, so, it was clearly. And this guy was about our age, so he was old enough to remember the General Lee and the whole, whatever. But that was his only answer. And after we watched the movie, we were like, can you imagine putting a symbol you don't really understand on your actual vehicle? But he did, so okay.
It'd be like somebody in Germany saying, it looks cool, the swastika on my car. I don't know what it means, but
Yeah, but no, a German would never say they didn't know what the swastika meant.
Well, also, it's illegal.
Yeah, there's that. But also, I'm wondering if he is lying.
We all
racism is frowned upon.
Yeah. We all kind of would rather he was lying than that ignorant. But
I don't know which is worse.
This is some random dude
jumping
that
on a
they encountered at a
bandwagon.
rest stop.
I mean, I'd rather you not understand that you're trying to, like, throw a flag in the face of Black people just to spite them than just be
Yeah.
so dumb that you don't realize that you're jumping on a racist bandwagon.
Yeah, they're
Either
both
way.
so bad. It's kind of a race to the
Exactly.
bottom.
You know what's funny about that? You know what's funny about that, you remember about basically 4 years ago that the whole statue debate thing
Yeah.
happening?
I mean, it's ongoing though.
Oh yeah.
But it's funny. They're thinking, don't tear down statues. It's history. And I'm like, you'd have a problem tearing down Saddam's statue when you invaded Iraq. His statue wasn't history. We had no problem tearing down King George the Third statue in the
They have no
Revolutionary
problem
War.
banning books.
We made
With history.
bullets out of George III statues during the Revolutionary War. Here's the thing. You can't make bullets out of the Confederate statues that got put up during Jim Crow because they aren't good enough quality metal. Honestly, I'm not a metallurgist, but I work at a jeweler's booth at a Ren Fair, and he knows what he's doing. The thing is those statues probably only had about 10 or 15 years left in them anyway, before they just fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, they were put in place for a very important reason, a very precise reason,
yeah.
And it wasn't longevity and
no,
paying homage to Robert E. Lee wasn't one of those
and
reasons.
It's worth noting that those statues were not put up during the Civil War.
Would not have been. Or even after. Not even immediately after. It would have been taboo for them to be put up immediately after.
You know who didn't want statues of Robert E. Lee put up?
Robert E. Lee.
Robert E. Lee, yeah.
Yep.
His descendants are still like, what are you people to take down the statues? What is wrong with you people?
You know what? I'll give his descendants credit. They know their history.
Yeah. But most of those statues were put up in the 1920s.
Yeah. Once again, to smite Black people. Just stay in your place.
I'm sure a lot of people know this, but maybe some don't. That funny story about the family. Robert E. Lee's wife was the great granddaughter of another slave owner, George Washington's wife. Yeah.
And Arlington National Cemetery was their home.
Yeah.
And the cemetery was put there by a passionate abolitionist Union officer who didn't want them to ever go home again. Plant them in Mrs. Lee's rose garden, he said.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is the environment we're working in for the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah, and up to this time, if I remember my history correctly, the Union wasn't doing that good in the war.
So some Union battles went really. There were a lot of stalemates. Yeah, we can't blame everything on George McClellan, tempting though it is. Like, if you know anything about Civil War history, that joke landed. Because George McClellan was arguably the worst general in the entire war.
Yeah, I
keep hearing
about
that.
how
maybe one of the worst generals ever.
Oh,
yeah, I heard it was true enough. I heard the rumors about sometimes that he had choices to take Richmond. And he's like,
yep,
nah.
He was constantly convinced that the South not only had more men than he did, but more men than it was possible for them to have by sheer population calculations.
I think, I could be wrong, but I think in the South, there were more slaves than there were actually slave owners.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, not even just slave. There's more slaves than white people.
Well, there was, I want to say 40% of the population of the Confederacy was Black. I'd have to look that up to be sure. So it wasn't a majority Black, but it certainly, there were more slaves than there were white men of military age.
That's not even including Louisiana, which which might have had black slave owners because of their culture down there.
No, there are slave owners of every color.
Yeah. Don Cheadle is actually descended from some of the last slaves in the United States to be freed because his ancestors were owned by Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't freed because the Constitution didn't apply to Native Americans.
Oh my God.
Which means that the 13th, 14th, whatever, all of those amendments didn't apply to their slaves.
Right.
So,
I thought about that. Oh my God.
So the time is, I think, January 1863.
Yeah, so the actual document was written in September of 1862.
Mm-hmm.
And Lincoln presented it to his cabinet and was like, we're doing this. Now, Lincoln very, very famously had a cabinet. Huh?
Wasn't there like a pre-emancipation, like 100? He gave him 100 days or something to like get the shit together. He
released the proclamation before it became official.
Okay.
Like if you look at the top of the text, on the 22nd day of September in the year of our Lord 1862,
mm-hmm.
he issues the proclamation, and it says on the 1st of January 1863, this is going into effect.
Yeah.
But when he presented it to the cabinet, even before, it was released to the general public, he was like, we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care. Lincoln very famously had a cabinet of people who disagreed with him a lot.
Yeah.
There were at least 3 guys in his cabinet who thought they would be a better president than he was.
Even his vice president.
Yeah, well.
Which is his own show. We won't go there.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about McClellan. He ran against Lincoln in the next election.
Well, yeah, he was the Democratic nominee, and he ran on a platform of ending the war. And it's worth noting that one of the votes he overwhelmingly lost was the soldier vote. So I think that tells you everything you need to know about McClellan, really.
Yeah.
Especially because ending the war in 1864 would have involved acknowledging the Confederacy as its own country.
Right.
And everybody knew that.
Except McClellan?
It's hard to say. I will never err on the side of assuming McClellan was smarter than he was.
Okay.
So he might have known, he might not have known. I think it's possible he felt that the South would just be persuaded by his sheer power of personality.
Fair enough.
McClellan had a little bit of an ego problem.
When I didn't attack your capital? Hi.
Yeah. But Lincoln had actually drawn up plans about what they were going to do in the stretch between the election and inauguration in the event that McClellan won, because he felt very, very strongly that they would have to win the war in that stretch if it was going to get won. So, yeah. Some of the generals were doing pretty well. Grant was doing really well in the West at the time. But a lot of the battles in the East were going badly.
I don't think Grant was fully in charge yet. He was still like a minor general or brigadier general.
Grant was out in the West. Grant, Sherman, most of the big names that we think of when we think of successful Union generals, they were all in the West. And in the East, you got McClellan.
And I think Meade, the Gettysburg guy.
Meade, yeah, there were a few others. McClellan actually got fired twice because Lincoln was trying so hard to find a general to replace him. He fired him once, couldn't find anybody he could make do the job, rehired him, got pissed off again, and fired him again.
He was I would say the MacArthur of his day, that the president fired.
MacArthur actually won some battles.
Oh, true.
And was never fooled by cannons that were actually just painted logs.
I think that his only thing was he didn't obey orders or something then.
Yeah. MacArthur had an enormous ego as well and didn't like obeying orders. But he was a better general than McClellan was. McClellan didn't want to move. A famous Lincoln quote, "If McClellan isn't using the army, I should like to borrow it for a while." You can never go wrong with a Lincoln quote. They're fantastic. Another one was McClellan said that he hadn't followed up after a battle because the men and horses of the army were tired, and Lincoln wanted to know what exactly they had been doing to get tired, because it clearly had not been their jobs. So when I say rude things about McClellan, I am not the first. I will not be the last.
Tell us how you really feel.
But
I haven't heard any McClellan jokes quotes, but apparently the McClellan quotes and the McClellan jokes not different.
Yeah, McClellan referred to Lincoln as an ape repeatedly.
What the fuck?
And one time, Lincoln came to his house to meet with him about something. McClellan was out at the time. McClellan came home, saw Lincoln waiting for him, and went upstairs and went to bed.
Nice.
He had no respect for Lincoln.
Nice.
Yeah.
Your president. That's
right. Your boss. Treat him like that. Go ahead. So,
yeah, I never heard any McClellan, but I recently found some Sherman memes.
Oh yeah, Sherman. Yeah, there are some really interesting personalities among the various generals of the Civil War. Sherman was actually a Southerner. He was one of a handful of Union generals who were, Southerners. But he firmly believed that what they were doing was treason, because it was.
I mean, yeah.
When you get right down to it. And he wanted to make the South pay. Yeah, Sherman was the one who basically just burned down the South. Sherman's march to the sea is about a 60-mile wide swath of total destruction, starting in Atlanta and making its way to the sea. And they burned plantations. Chimneys standing on their own with the house around them completely burned down were referred to as Sherman's Sentinels. They stole everything. They freed the slaves as they went. Sherman, you'll pardon the expression, Sherman took no prisoners on his way to the sea. Though the fate of prisoners during the Civil War was not fun on either side. But by September 1862, the successes in the West are starting to give Lincoln enough confidence that they might actually win this war. And so he presented the Emancipation Proclamation to his cabinet and was like, we are doing this. He waited until after a major Union victory to announce it.
Was that?
Antietam, I think.
Antietam, yeah.
Yeah, because he wanted the PR boost.
Right.
Was that the one that was one of the few northern invasions in Maryland?
No.
It was one of the bloodiest battles.
Yeah. Let me look up exactly.
Between that and Gettysburg, like the bloodiest, arguably the bloodiest battle.
Yeah, I knew. I know there's at least I could there be more, but I know two major ones where the South invaded. One was Gettysburg in Pennsylvania, another one was in Maryland. But I forget what battle that was.
Antietam Creek is in Pennsylvania and Maryland.
So it
And
was the invasion.
most Civil War battles have two names.
Oh yeah, different, like Battle of Manassas and Battle of Bull Run.
Right, exactly. And it's because the Southerners mostly named the battles after towns, and the Northerners mostly named them after, like, streams and things. So, the Battle of Antietam is pretty much, like, just on the border there. Between, let me see if I can get an exact map here. Don't mind me searching Wikipedia.
I was gonna say because I'm in Maryland, and I was like, "Is that can't be Maryland?" So
Yeah, it's near. It's in Washington County, Maryland.
Yeah,
so I
right.
was right.
It's
was
right on the border.
Yeah, it's in the really narrow part of Maryland too.
Yeah,
so it was one of the South invading things.
Yeah. It's the first.
It's like right on the corner. It's like right there, like Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia. It's like right there.
Yeah, and it's I believe it's what made the second time that McClellan got fired, because he didn't follow up after the battle. And
it's funny you think about Washington was right on the border between the Union and the Confederacy.
Oh yeah, Washington was in danger the entire war.
Oh yeah,
and then of course the southern capital was in Virginia.
Wait, yeah, Richmond, which is like a stone's throw.
It would take you a while, but you could walk between the two capitals without too much difficulty. And
I mean, I could probably do it now. Well, we have roads, but and maybe like take one night to sleep. It's not that far.
So let's do a quick search of the distance there. Yeah, it's 108 miles.
Yeah.
Via I-95. Don't know how far that is walking, but
so today is a 2-hour drive, give or take.
Today it is a 2-hour drive between the two capitals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I used to live in the town of Port Angeles, Washington, which I was told was established in federal law as where the capital would go if Washington, D.C. fell, because the Confederacy was not going to take Port Angeles. Having lived there for a couple of years, they wouldn't want it anyway. It's fine. But that's Washington State.
Yeah.
Also, back to the fighting. You mentioned it was. We'll get to the main topic in a second. You mentioned it was bloody. Like, this was the transition between the old form of in-line fighting with muskets and the start of the trench warfare.
Yeah. And the thing is when people talk about World War I, they talk about how the generals of World War I are still fighting using tactics that would have been successful during the Napoleonic Wars. And the U.S. had their awakening that didn't work anymore a lot sooner than Europe did. Because the Civil War was the American, hey, Napoleonic tactics don't work anymore.
Yeah.
Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. Let's send thousands of guys across a gently rolling field to a stone wall with machine guns on the other side. I mean, Gatling guns, but still. Repeating rifles, certainly.
Yeah, this wasn't the days of musket balls pluming down and gunpowder. This was spear bullets, rifle bullets, and spiral rifles and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, rockets date back further because, the rocket's red glare in the Star Spangled Banner is from the War of 1812. But you did start getting...
They weren't that portable yet until...
Yeah, they weren't that portable, and you got something resembling modern artillery pieces in the Civil War, and you got the first repeating... I'm not a gun expert, but, the Gatling gun and that nature of you don't have to reload every single shot. And, of course, you don't have to take the time to pour the powder in and use the, the mini ball was the new technology at the time. and it was a cartridge. So warfare starting with the American Civil War is suddenly a very, very different thing than warfare starting in, the Napoleonic Wars.
Or even the Mexican War of like 10, 15 years earlier.
1940s, yeah. Which, by the way, Lee and Grant met during the Mexican-American War. When they met again at Appomattox Courthouse, they talked about the last time they had seen each other back in the 1840s. So that is all of what's going on around these battles, and don't get me wrong, some of the battles would not have been successful even with generals, even if some of the generals had understood modern warfare better, they were just bad generals, and that wouldn't have changed anything.
Yeah, I started to think about, at least, probably the Northern generals too, but a lot of the Southern generals were more, it's about the Northern generals too, a lot of them were more about flashy battles than actually winning the war.
Yeah. And at the beginning of the war, Lincoln wanted, it wasn't Burnside, who was it? The general that he wanted to run the Union forces had been the head of the forces during the Mexican-American War, and was therefore not a young man, and had put on so much weight he could not, in point of fact, ride a horse anymore.
I know you're talking about, I can't remember his name.
Yeah, no, it's going to drive me crazy until I find the man's name. You know what? I know how to look it up. It'll be under Anaconda Plan, because that was his idea.
The blockade of the South.
Yeah, and the thing is, the Anaconda Plan was a good idea. It's what eventually ended up working. Winfield Scott.
Oh, Scott.
There it is. Yeah.
I saw a video about him, or something that happened. I saw a video about him during the we're talking about the Pig War of Canada.
Yeah. Winfield's, the oversimplified on that is great. Winfield Scott was born June 13th, 1786.
God.
Which means he was older than the Constitution. And he was Lincoln's first choice for general. And, yeah, so that was a problem.
It's talking about that. It's funny that one of the generals he had disagreement with, and that thing was Pickett, I think.
Yeah. Pickett, who, as I recall, came in last in his class in the 1842, 1844, somewhere in there, class at West Point. But yeah, Winfield Scott, and I don't shame people for their weight, but you're not going to make a very good field general if you weigh too much to ride a horse. You are just not mobile enough.
Yeah.
And
you do kind of have to be a little spry to...
Yeah, and he was in his 70s, and yes, not a young man, Winfield Scott. And apparently a huge stickler for military decorum, and he was a bad choice. Just, no. But the Anaconda Plan was a good idea, and it worked.
Fair enough.
So there's that. But, the first couple of years of the Civil War is a lot of, okay, we're figuring out what we're doing with new war technology.
Wasn't there also a rumor that they wanted Lee to be a charge for a while, but before Virginia...
Yeah, they approached Lee before Virginia seceded, and he chose Virginia. And we've talked about this. Before the Civil War, the United States was a plural. And he went with his state because at the time your state was more important than your country.
I think some of that thing is still around in some states.
Yeah, but it's not as pervasive. And so half the generals went with the South and half went with the North. And that went all the way down the officer corps. You know, there was that split between Southern and North. So you had to rearrange your units based on who had gone where. And there were still, God's help us, political generals. Yeah, even though it is against the U.S. flag code. The first major casualty of the Civil War was an officer who was a personal friend of Lincoln's, who was a political officer. He was appointed, he wasn't a soldier. So that's the background on the fighting at the time leading up to the Emancipation Proclamation. And yeah, several of the early battles, the North did not do so well.
Hmm.
And that Antietam was an enormously costly battle.
Yeah.
12,000 casualties on the northern side. And yeah, a lot of those were wounded, but let's be real, with the state of medicine at the time, wounded can just mean, and then they died 3 weeks later.
Right.
Or they got a scratch, and then they had to lose an arm. This is right around the time that Clara Barton started going to the battlefields to provide on-the-spot nursing that would eventually lead through a whole... I had a book about her when I was a kid, to the American Red Cross. So, yeah, the battle was a victory, but it was an extremely costly victory, but it was still enough so that Lincoln said, okay, we're doing it.
A lot of it, too, was... a lot of it, well, all of as with any political anything, a lot of it was propaganda too, I believe. Because there's a lot of spin. I mean, there's a lot of, we were talking about deaths, injuries, missing. I mean, the numbers missing, holy shit.
Yeah.
I mean, it took a lot of political spin, and I think it was, I mean, well, yeah, we're nearing the end of the war, obviously, but the war was 4 years at this point?
Yeah, this is not even halfway through.
Yeah. I mean, and this is Lincoln's I think it was so funny. I read a couple of things about Lincoln didn't think the Civil War was going to be as bad as it was. It was kind of like Putin's 3-day war to him.
Was it?
Yeah, a lot of the early enlistments were for 90 days.
Right.
Yeah. There was the you're talking about the Battle of Bull Run, Manassas. There were picnickers there. I think.
Yeah.
What's a battle, honey? Okay, we bring the kids.
Depends on how you define war. Is the answer to this question. Which, admittedly, is such a slippery historian answer, but it's still true. How you define war actually matters as to whether or not we've been fighting a war. Because technically, only Congress can declare war.
Right, which they haven't done since World War II.
Well, no, they declared the Gulf War.
Or Gulf, okay, yeah, fair enough.
After we've been fighting for 90 days, but they did.
Yeah, sure, I guess let the little kids
if you want to be technical. So technically, Korea and Vietnam don't count.
Right. That was my point. Sorry.
Yeah,
I am not a historian.
Yeah, which is ridiculous, but there it is. But the other propaganda factor that is at least as important as anything on the home front is the Confederacy desperately wanted Great Britain and France to fight on their side.
That was funny.
And this was the turning point for them, I think.
As soon as Lincoln made the war about slavery from the northern perspective...
He was a great politician.
He was a fantastic politician. As soon as he made it about slavery from the northern side, it became political suicide
for any other country.
Any other country to join the Confederacy.
we were one of the last countries to allow to still have slavery.
Yeah, I was going to say,
they were
Brazil
looking,
probably could have joined the Confederacy.
right?
But,
yeah, I mean, like,
think a
they
lot
weren't
of
going to find
Confederates moved to
allies.
Brazil afterwards.
No, yeah, they weren't going to find allies that could help them
Yeah.
fighting. I mean, I think almost each state that was on the Confederate side had like not a manifesto, but like they all had like these their own proclamations. Like,
yeah,
no,
they all
we
had
let
documents of
documents
secession.
of succession. Thank you. Or manifestos, whatever.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it.
They kind of read like manifestos. I'm just saying.
I've read them. They are manifestos.
So, yeah, I mean, after you have that in writing, like, no, we want to own people. Fuck you. I'm sorry, I would clean up my act here.
Yeah,
you're tying the hands of anybody that you would need help from.
And the UK was kind of fence sitting anyway because cotton was a really big deal. Yeah, this was before the Indian cotton trade had really picked up. Mm-hmm. So the cotton mills of the UK absolutely relied on American cotton.
And
right. I mean, cotton, America was the number one supplier of cotton worldwide.
Absolutely, yes.
Nobody wanted to see that go away. But they also hated slavery and would not have been able to survive, whether it's re-election or whatever political strife from their own people.
What's funny about that is, from what I've heard, if a certain invention had been invented in the late 1700s, the cotton wouldn't have been that profitable at all.
Yeah, the cotton gin. The funny thing is that the repeating rifle and the cotton gin are both basically from inventions by the same guy. Eli Whitney made not a dime on the cotton gin because it was too easy to make one, and so nobody paid for it. And then he went into munitions, and that was where he made all of his money. And the cotton, I'm not a botanist, so this is all my historical information where they give you just enough so you know what you're talking about. But the cotton grown in the United States had very long fibers, but the fibers and the seeds and the fibers were really hard to separate. Yeah. And it was a really long, laborious, exhausting, not financially worth it process pre the invention of the cotton gin. Yeah. It is actually arguable, and I'm not qualified to be part of that argument, but it is argued in certain historical circles that if the cotton gin had not been invented, slavery actually would have died out the way the founding fathers hoped it would.
Yeah, I think the major cash crop at the time before that was still tobacco.
Yeah. Depends on where you work.
Huge.
Well, tobacco, rice, and indigo are the three big... People forget about indigo, but it was huge in the South pre-cotton. Yeah. And those were the three big cash crops in the days before the cotton gin. And cotton just wasn't worth it.
No, yeah, I actually, gosh, I can't remember where I was, but I was little. And I was in somebody's backyard and they were like, oh, that's cotton. It was like wild cotton. Mm-hmm. And I remember like taking it like a fluff. And I'm like, there's a lot of seeds in here. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, well, the slaves had to pick the seeds out of the cotton. And I remember like it just fell apart. Like it was just so hard to get the seeds out of the cotton. And I'm like, it had to be in my head. Like, again, I'm like under 10 at this point. And I'm thinking it had to be easier than this because you can't do it. It's just, it's very difficult. And I'm still amazed that they were able to.
The Civil War happened the way it did because of cotton. Like you can't underestimate how important cotton was to the existence of the Civil War at all. Because first off, cotton is horrible for the land, which is why they kept wanting to expand slavery. Because they wore out their land growing cotton.
oh my God, so much is making sense now.
Yeah,
Sorry,
cotton's
go ahead.
horrible for the land, and they didn't have the kind of modern fertilizers and things that would have helped them rejuvenate their land, and they certainly weren't going to let the land fallow,
Okay.
because that's not
You know
making
what?
money.
No, because I heard that this part of the Civil War was started because they wouldn't let them expand. And I was just like, what freaking difference does it make? But saying that makes so much
Yeah.
more sense.
Cotton is a horrible crop for the land. It's a hugely labor-intensive crop.
Yeah.
Because it's got to be planted by hand, it's got to be hoed by hand, it's got to be picked by hand.
Isn't that one of the reasons why that one guy started producing what's the word I'm looking for? Trying to promote peanuts?
Yeah, George Washington Carver. One of the reasons that he got really into peanuts was that peanuts are so much better for the land than cotton is. And it was something they could plant on this land that had been destroyed by cotton that would actually help fix nitrogen in the soil and bring back the soil so that it was worth growing on. You can't learn American history without picking up a certain amount of botany because it's so important to just the South. So they were having trouble because they had to have all of this labor for the cotton, and then the cotton gin takes off and they don't want to let the land fallow, so they want to expand slavery, and it's this massive thing. And because these cotton mills in the UK are standing, vacant, then they were convinced that eventually they would be able to get the UK on their side. Even though slavery had been abolished in the UK for decades at this point, the 1820s, I want to say, certainly no later than the 1840s, they knew that they, it was political suicide, but at the same time, so was letting people starve because there was no work.
Yeah. I think Britain was like, we're iffy about the slave thing, but we do like cotton. So
first couple of years of the war, Britain is very clearly kind of playing for time with the Confederacy to see if they can make it politically feasible to come in on the side of the Confederacy so they can have their cotton back, please and thank you. And so that is another point that Lincoln is covering with the Emancipation Proclamation. Because coming in on the side of the Confederacy becomes coming in on the side of slavery, no questions asked, as soon as this document is declared.
Yeah.
So it is another very, very astute move from Lincoln.
Yeah, there was rumors that the South won. The South had one. It would want to conquer Mexico and the Caribbean and down south.
Yeah, there is nowhere south of Texas that somebody in the Confederacy didn't want to conquer once they won the Civil War. They wanted to, first off, they wanted to keep expanding westward. I think the southern halves of Arizona and New Mexico, which were both territories at the time, not states, but the southern halves of those territories were very slave sympathetic. And the northern halves of the territories were abolitionist sympathetic.
Hence the what was it? The Kansas-Nebraska Act. First country.
Well, yeah, this is after Kansas-Nebraska. This is even one of the last battles of the Civil War was fought in New Mexico. Now, California had very firmly said in 1850, we're a free state, thank you very much. And the thing is a lot of what happened with California statehood happened the way it did because gold had been discovered. And California was able to make a lot of demands because they had gold. And one of them was, we're coming in as a free state or not at all.
Which was, at the time, because of that was it the 1820 line thing they had compromise.
Yeah, it's under the Missouri Compromise, I want to say. Technically, California should have had to divide into two states, a northern one and a southern one, because of how far south Southern California was. And Southern California, which at the time was the poorer part of California, would have been a slave state. But because gold had been discovered there, they said, no, we're keeping all of our land. You can't make us split up.
Okay. I was wondering that about California. It has always seemed like it is needed to be two states, and right now I think there's a push for three.
Oh, there have been pushes for as many as 5 over the years.
Wow. And I know Texas had 5.
Yeah.
Well, but
if you divide California, odds are really, really good. What you're going to do is create the richest state in the union and the poorest state in the union. Yeah, because California is a lot more diverse than people think it is.
I mean, not even that. There's like big parts of California where there's just nothing.
Oh yeah, no. A lot of California was a big deal during the gold rush and has not been since.
Right.
And the day that California became a state, every single county in California had the same population.
Wow.
They all had the population of the city of San Francisco.
Seriously?
The county and city line of San Francisco is the same line.
Wow. That's insane.
Yeah, and so you look at San Bernardino County is larger than several states.
Mm-hmm.
And compare it to some of the Northern California states that are just bitty. And it's because there was gold in those counties.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I know California history really well because I grew up there and had an excellent California history teacher. So, yeah. So California was actually sending people east to fight in the war. Not a lot of them, but, enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were never going to get slavery all the way to California because California didn't want it. But the southern parts of Arizona and New Mexico were the next place they were aiming for slavery. And part of the unspoken part of the Mexican-American War was, if we conquer Mexico, maybe we can have slaves there. Like, Texan independence stems from the fact that Mexico had abolished slavery.
Nice.
And the Americans who had moved into Texas didn't want to give up their slaves.
I don't know how the conquered Mexicans would feel about being conquered, and would they have made this Mexican slaves, or would Mexicans been free people if they conquered Mexico?
I mean, that's a question, isn't it?
Well, I mean, technically, native Texans are also native Mexicans.
Yeah. A lot of the native peoples were on both sides of that river.
Yeah.
So
I have to say one thing. If they did, that would definitely solve the Texas-Mexico border debate they're having right now.
I mean, there is that.
No, I mean, it was part of Mexico. Like, it wasn't before it was ours. It was, say theirs. We were fighting with, who were we fighting with to get Texas?
It was Mexico. We fought, Santa Anna was the general.
Yeah. Okay. This is right after, a few years earlier, Mexico had broke away from the Spanish, and then right afterwards.
Yeah, I think it was the Spaniards that I was thinking of, but
yeah,
I know that. I know there's a huge Texas had been part of Mexico because there's been a lot of arguments with the natives there now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
just saying, like, stop treating us like this. We were here first. The border crossed us.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about this from my memory.
As far as I know, there weren't any Mexican slaves. There were a lot of African slaves that fled to Mexico for freedom.
I could be wrong about this, obviously, but from when I heard about the difference between us and the Mexican people was the Spanish and the Indians more interbred down there than we did up here?
Yeah, there's a chart, and I don't have it, but there is a chart with 64 different names for ethnic background, depending on what percentage of what your background is.
Oh God.
With 100% European, 100% Native, and 100% African, and then the varying percentages of all of those depending on how many of your grandparents are what.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Wow.
Yeah, I think the difference between the British colonists and then the French and the Spanish, they mainly went there for gold or fur and stuff, so they mainly sent the men. The British sent their whole families over.
Not 100% true.
Well, yeah, nothing's 100% true. But
It depends really, really strongly on what colony you're looking at. Jamestown, first permanent British settlement in the New World, started out being pretty much exclusively guys. And guys who were in no way prepared for life in the New World, side note. There were like more hatters than actual people who knew how to farm in the Jamestown colony. Because they just thought they were going to find gold and it would be fine.
I just go over here, find some gold, live my life.
Yeah, exactly. And so you get, Plymouth has whole families, not because they're there for the land, because they are there to get away from the Church of England.
Right.
So all up and down the East Coast, there had been, here's a settlement of families, here's a settlement of dudes trying to get rich. And Nova Scotia, I want to say, was originally cod fishermen. And, you get the French wandering through Canada looking for beaver pelts. And, there are a lot of settlements that are families, but there's probably an equal number of random dudes looking to get rich. And there are some towns that were Spanish families.
Like I said, I probably was wrong, but I figured that there were a lot more, interbreeding between the natives and the other European countries than there was of the British, but I could have been probably wrong.
The issue is probably a northern-southern European divide as much as anything else, because England has been conquered but by a lot of people, but never by the Moors. So there are a lot more Spanish people from Spain whose ancestry is not pure European. Simply because, 600 years ago, 700 years ago, a Moorish family intermarried into the family. And you just did not get that to the same extent in England. It still happened, but not to the same extent. So I think the Spanish were a lot more, well, the natives, they're part of it. But also, Pocahontas. One of the whitest friends I have is descended from Pocahontas. Because she married an English guy.
Yeah. Not
John Smith. Different English guy.
Right.
Rolf.
But, yeah, and then she died of tuberculosis, because of course she did. But a lot of founding fathers in the very, very early days were married to especially very prominent Native women. Because let's not forget, Pocahontas, princess is the wrong word, but,
Yeah, yeah.
So, what would have happened if we had actually succeeded in conquering Mexico is...
Or what if the South was allowed to, the Confederates were allowed to succeed, and then began to
Yeah.
move into Mexico. Like that would have been an interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculative fiction about it, and there's a lot of it for a reason.
Yeah.
And of course, you look at New Orleans, and New Orleans had a very, very different society as far as intermixing of peoples.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. A lot of their slave owners had Black history too.
Yeah. New Orleans is the town where you get names like Octoroon, God help us.
Oh, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah. Based on how many Black ancestors you had.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, I think they're also part French because of the Quebec down.
The Acadians, yeah. Not Quebec. Acadia is, I think it's actually Nova Scotia.
Oh.
But they were kicked out by the British from Acadia, and they moved to New Orleans, to Louisiana, and that's where you get both the Creoles and the Cajuns, is from that whole thing. So
yeah, after the 7-Year War / French and Indian War.
Yeah.
If you're American or anywhere else.
Yeah. So, a lot of the American slave owners, let's be clear here, it's not that they weren't raping their slaves.
No, that would definitely happen.
But they wouldn't free their children. And slave owners in some other cultures did. So it's a really, it's a cultural thing that is more complicated, because of course it is, more complicated than just, slave owner, Americans versus whatever. There's a lot of different factors going on in there.
Oh my God, yeah.
So I don't think anyone can say what would happen if we had actually started taking over places to the south. Cuba was a popular choice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing we can say for sure is nothing good for those people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it would have been bad, especially for, the actual enslaved people.
Mm-hmm.
But politically speaking, wow, it would have been complicated.
Yeah, we mentioned this before in our Constitution talk and stuff, that I don't want to say it was less harsh, but the slaves of the United States and stuff could actually live long enough to have kids. It was the Caribbean and the Brazilian slaves that had to be replaced every so often because of the sugar thing.
Yeah, slaves in sugar plantations had the highest death rate of any slaves in the New World. It is
Why was that?
Well, partially because of the climate that's required to grow sugar.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't going to get winters off because it wasn't growing season.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And sugarcane itself is brutal to grow. And honestly, the policies of the slave owners, and I don't know why this is true, but the policies of the slave owners in sugar plantations were horrific by slave owner standards.
Yeah, I could be wrong about the percentage, but I think only about 5-10% of the slaves went to the Americas. The other
Brazil absorbed such a higher percentage of the slave trade than the United States did, and part of that was they went through more slaves. Slaves in the United States, and let's be crystal clear that I am not glorifying the life of a slave in the United States.
No, that's very
horrific. Yeah. And even if it wasn't horrific, that wouldn't have made slavery okay.
I know, because which is better? I don't know if that's worse or better. You live long enough to have kids that are slaves too.
Right, exactly. It's all bad. But because these slaves were dying at the rates they were in Brazil and in the Caribbean, they bought more slaves because they needed to replace the dying slaves and didn't have the generation of children to replace the dying slaves.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So,
slaves further north, I guess, were living long enough to support breeding farms, which is always fun.
Boy, we could get into stories about that, except I really don't want to because they're awful.
No. Yeah, no, they're horrible. And again, Emancipation Proclamation.
Right,
We are so off track, but I had to bring it out. You were talking about births, and I'm like, I'm not letting this conversation go without talking about the breeding farms.
Yeah,
look it up. It was horrible, and
being a historian, it's really depressing sometimes. Everyone.
Around this time, if I'm 1820, when this was promoted or proclaimed, I know of 2 states like Nevada and West Virginia that became states during the war. Was this before or after this document?
So I have to look up Nevada because Nevada's statehood is less directly relevant to the war, so I don't remember it. West Virginia is after, but they were in the process of before, and it is actually. And we talked about this. It's in the Constitution.
They split on that, though, right?
Huh?
Didn't West Virginia split based on a lot of?
It's in the Constitution that you cannot make a state out of a portion of another state without the agreement of the state that people are splitting from, and West Virginia was the exception to that because screw Virginia, it was the middle of the Civil War.
Right.
So, yeah. Nevada, Halloween, 1864. So, after the Emancipation Proclamation.
It was a Union state too, I think, right?
It's probably sent even fewer people than California did. And by 1864, I don't think they really got a choice of joining as a slave state.
Yeah.
I can't see that being something that was...
Well, didn't they stop that? Before the Civil War, I thought they stopped. Like you couldn't.
There are 3 different times when they were totally, absolutely not letting slave states, except for these. No, really, we swear.
Mm-hmm.
But 1864. Okay, first off, this is the one time this was a good thing. The Republicans were in charge of Nevada in those days. And since the Republicans were, at the time, the side of freedom for slaves.
Yeah, they were more progressive. They were more progressive back then, right?
In 1864, yes.
Yeah. Nobody thinks they're progressive now.
It turns out that the way things were 150 years ago aren't the same as they are today. Who knew?
They're not.
I may have written a few essays for people's aunts and uncles on Facebook about this.
Thank you.
Because I think even today, I think
a couple fewer than I have to write essays for.
Yeah, I actually got.
Not to get off on a tangent, but I'm really tired of these people like doing these street what are these questions or whatever. It's like, did you know that the Republicans were the ones that fought to free the slaves, not the Democrats?
Oh my God. Yeah. No.
What's your point?
Southern strategy, folks. Southern strategy. It's a thing. Look it up.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Going back to Nevada, though.
Nevada, yeah.
Thing about Nevada is I remember that jokes about this that it's less state and more federal territory.
Yeah. Nevada, if reading between the lines, mostly wanted to become a state so that they weren't part of Utah anymore. Which, fair. Nevada was a lot more, let's say open-minded than Utah towards a lot of things.
Okay.
And didn't want to be controlled by the Mormons. And so became a state because then they didn't have to listen to the Mormons anymore. And who can blame them? So, yeah. But West Virginia, the counties that formed West Virginia seceded from Virginia when Virginia seceded.
Okay.
and formed their own state.
Sadly, I wish they were as progressive today as they were
I
back then.
know.
Yeah,
I know.
well,
Like,
the issue at the time was that they were the poor counties.
Mm-hmm.
And the people in the poor counties couldn't afford slaves. And were very, very aware that they were being controlled by the planter class in the east side of the state that expected the poor hill folk of West Virginia to go fight and die to defend their property.
yeah, I don't know if you remember this from a few years ago, the Telltale Heart issue of West Virginia and his issues with his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, totally different. But yeah, I do remember them. I don't remember a lot about, because nobody talks about West Virginia a lot. But a lot of it. So my ex father-in-law was actually a secretary of something under Joe Manchin when he was governor. So he's been like in a lot of stuff. And so like the few things I know about West Virginia, I learned from him because he's just like really like old school Republican. Not, I mean, I guess kind of in the good old boys club, but not like in a not in like a sexist way. More like he just, I don't know, it's a small state and everybody knows everybody. But he's really fought for like union rights and, like very, very, very much for the people. He was the one that I heard about, like company towns. I learned about company towns from, and all that. Like West Virginia had a really like that. Yeah. The west part of Virginia has always had a really hard way. And they've always kind of been under the foot of the working class. So it's really interesting to hear that that's more details into why they succeeded.
Yeah. They weren't gonna fight for slavery, and they knew,
right?
Because they were in Virginia, and so they seceded because they didn't want to fight for the property of the people who
they didn't want to die for somebody who has been like oppressing them for like their entire lives,
because the Eastern Virginians owned the banks,
right?
Which meant that the West Virginians who owed money owed it to the Eastern Virginians. So yeah, that was a purely financial issue as far as West Virginia was concerned.
Yeah, I would say that they were more, because a lot of these in the South, they might not have been slave owners, but they didn't really care what the slave owners did. Well, and
the one thing that I will say is that they tangled up a lot of Confederate resources from the armies wandering aimlessly through the Shenandoah Valley. So, this is the broad political overview of the United States in the early 1860s, and you're dealing with a lot of, well, my states believe such and such, and this is what things are like where I am. And of course, because communication took so long, it was harder to really understand places further away.
Yeah, I think 1860 was when the first telegraph happened. So this was the beginning of telegraph.
Yeah. The Pony Express was still going. And it only lasted 18 months. So, one of the things that made Lincoln as passionately abolitionist, again, on a personal level, because his politics were a different thing, but as passionately abolitionist as he was he visited New Orleans. And he saw slavery as he traveled down the Mississippi River from Illinois to Louisiana. And it horrified him. And he knew, what the political will looks like. Like, a lot of the states seceded because they thought that Lincoln was just, I guess, going to come personally door to door taking everybody's slaves. And he knew he did not have the authority to end slavery.
Right.
Lincoln absolutely knew it was going to take a constitutional amendment to end slavery. And in 1860, when he was elected, there was not that will.
I'm still shocked that he got a constitutional amendment.
Oh, it's, I don't know if you've seen Lincoln, the Spielberg movie.
Oh, no.
It's really worth watching because it's a lot more about the shady backrooms deal.
Okay.
To get that amendment passed. Not ratified even, just passed through Congress. They are straight out blackmailing senators in that movie.
You'd have to.
You did.
You'd have to. I mean, because we're talking about all the Confederate states. Like two-thirds of everybody like that.
This is before the war has ended.
Right.
Lincoln knew he had to get this is another okay, here is our deadline. We have got to get this amendment to the Constitution before the war is over because it's got to be presented to the Confederate States as you will ratify this or else.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it wasn't as good as this document was. It wasn't an official wall document.
If you look at the actual
Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah. If you look at the actual, an hour in Emancipation Proclamation. So our text here, which our transcript is courtesy of archives.gov, who I strongly recommend if you want the transcript of any major political document in the U.S. Whereas on the 22nd day of September, in the year of our Lord 1862, a proclamation was issued by the President of the United States, containing, among other things, the following, to wit, that on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. And the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons, and will do no act or acts to repress such persons or any of them in any efforts they may make for their actual freedom. That the executive will, on the first day of January aforesaid, by proclamation, designate the states and parts of states, if any, in which the people thereof, respectively, shall then be in rebellion against the United States, and the fact that any state or the people thereof shall on that date be, in good faith, represented in the Congress of the United States by members chosen thereto at elections wherein a majority of the qualified voters of such state shall have participated, shall, in the absence of strong countervailing testimony, be deemed conclusive evidence that such state and the people thereof are not then in rebellion against the United States. Now therefore I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, by virtue of the power in me vested as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States in time of actual armed rebellion against the authority and government of the United States, and as a fit and necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion, due on this first day of January in the year of our Lord 1863, and in accordance with my purpose to do so publicly proclaimed for the full period of 100 days from the day first above mentioned, order and designate as the states and parts of states wherein the people thereof respectively are this day in rebellion against the United States, the following, to wit, Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, except the parishes of St. Bernard, Plaquemine, Jefferson, St. John, St. Charles, St. James Ascension, Assumption, Terrebonne, Lafourche, St. Mary, St. Martin, and Orleans, including the city of New Orleans, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, except the 48 counties designated as West Virginia, and also the counties of Berkeley, Accomack, Northampton, Elizabeth City, York, Princess Anne, and Norfolk, including the cities of Norfolk and Portsmouth, and which accepted parts are, for the present, left precisely as if this proclamation were not issued. And by virtue of the power and for the purpose aforesaid, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and parts of states are and henceforward shall be free, and that the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authorities thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of said persons. And I hereby enjoin upon the people so declared to be free to abstain from all violence, unless in necessary self-defense, and I recommend to them that, in all cases when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. And I further declare and make known that such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States, to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service. And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice, warranted by the Constitution, upon military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God. In witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the United States to be affixed, done at the city of Washington, this first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 87th. By the President Abraham Lincoln, William H. Seward, Secretary of State. Now, I've probably mispronounced a few of those Louisiana counties because I don't know if you say them in English or French. And anyway, I never took French, I took Spanish. But that's very clear.
Yeah.
There's an argument in historical circles that this document did not free, by itself, a single person.
Well, I mean, so what I don't know, when I first read it, and kind of what it sounds like is like, we're going to let you keep your slaves if you put down your arms.
Yeah, basically.
So, I mean, it wasn't necessarily written to free slaves.
No, it was mostly written to end the war.
Right.
Because let's be clear about Lincoln. Everything he did had the aim of preserving the Union and ending the war.
Yes. Yes.
That
Which is
being
why I
said,
get my panties in a bunch when people, like, stuff like this is why I get my panties in a bunch when people are like, Lincoln freed the slaves. So inadvertently, I mean.
Well, not with this document, he didn't.
Sure. I mean, yeah, no, I said stuff like this.
Yeah.
There's more.
Yeah.
Of course, also it would depend if they actually won too, because if they lost, this would be meaningless anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the thing is if the United States, if the Union had lost the war, he could have freed all the slaves he wanted to in the slave states, and it wouldn't have made a lick of difference, because he wouldn't have controlled it. But, you know, what he did with this document was not free people. I'm under no illusions about that. He's not freeing people with this document.
He's threatening. He's
changing the shape of the war. He is making it impossible for the Confederacy to gain allies again, except for the possible, possibly Brazil. But I really don't think Brazil was going to step in, because Brazil knew that those Southerners would turn on them in a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
But by issuing this document, he pretty much guarantees that the North is going to win sooner or later.
Right.
It'll take a while, especially, because it took a while to find a general that was worth a damn. But he knew, actually, Baron Rothschild at the time had said that the Union was going to win the war because it had the bigger purse. The Union could hold out longer than the South could.
Mm.
They had the manufacturing, they had the money, they had the railroads, they had the immigrants. They were going to win sooner or later, unless the Confederacy managed to gain allies.
Right.
And now Lincoln has made it impossible for them to gain allies.
How long after this did they start working on the 13th Amendment?
So, that's another one of those where, it depends on how you define working on. which again, that's a slippery. The amendment didn't come until 1865. It was passed on April 8th, which is before April 8th, 1864, by the House. Passed, ratified, actually, on my birthday, December 6th, admittedly 1865, which is a little before I was born. But my birthday is 13th Amendment Ratification Day. So the 13th Amendment was being worked on a full year before the war ended. So almost as soon as he had this document. So the First Amendment they proposed would have required the states to abolish slavery by January 1st, 1900. Which is certainly a timeline.
Instead of right away?
Yeah, 1900. You've got 35 years. Go. He, in the State of the Union for 1862, which was December 1st, he presented a plan for emancipation and deportation. Because another thing I'm not going to argue is that Lincoln was a perfect man. Actually, Frederick Douglass is the one who talked him out of the whole deportation thing. Frederick Douglass was like, what are you thinking? What is this?
Yeah.
And pointed out, from a pure logistics perspective.
I was thinking that too.
You can't deport that many people.
4 million people, yeah. But they
That's
did they did offer it up to some people who did. Yeah. Who did?
I mean, the nation of Liberia.
Mm-hmm.
The city of Monrovia is named after U.S. President James Monroe because it was founded by freed U.S. slaves.
Yeah.
So, the deportation thing, and honestly, would become something that was talked about in certain black circles for decades after the war.
Yep.
There was a strong Back to Africa movement. It also logistically could not have worked, but at least it wasn't founded on, we don't want those people
right
spoiling our country. Except possibly the other way around, if you know what I mean.
Right, yeah. Like, those are people who enslaved us and can't be trusted.
Right, yeah, no. And I mean, far be it for me to say that they should have trusted those people, the ones who made them slaves. But yeah, Lincoln in 1863 was like, okay, you can rejoin the United States if you abolish slavery. And the southern states were like, not feeling it.
Yeah, one of the requirements to rejoin as full citizens again was to ratify the 13th and maybe 14th Amendment.
Yeah. In order to rejoin the United States and get the rights of white people back, they had to ratify these amendments. So...
Yeah, they're like, we'll find a way around it later, but right now let's just sign this.
Yeah, and that gets into Jim Crow and all of that. But the amendment, the 13th Amendment really fought to get passed and took no little really sleazy dealings from people working for Lincoln. So I will argue that Lincoln helped to free the slaves, but it was not with the Emancipation Proclamation. Under any conceivable stretch. That did not free slaves and was not intended to. It was a stepping stone. But, it was for political reasons and not humanitarian reasons.
Right.
It was pragmatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the issue, the 14th, is like important right now in today's community. Nothing to do with the citizenship or anything, but at the time, the southern states came back like, "Hey, we're back. We're back in the Congress again. Let's all be friends again." They're like, no.
Yeah, the leadership of the southern states really thought that we were just going to pretend that those 4 years hadn't happened. And in a lot of ways, they were right. But in a few others, they were not. And part of that was down to the assassination of Lincoln. Lincoln's plans for Reconstruction were very, very different than what Reconstruction ended up looking like.
Yeah, I shit on Lincoln a lot, but we'd be a lot further along if he had been allowed to sit through Reconstruction.
Yeah, didn't he look to have a bit more friendlier thing, or I don't know if it was more friendlier.
For one thing, the House, the leadership, the Republican leadership of the United States at the time, didn't trust Andrew Johnson because he was a Southerner.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he'd been made vice president because they needed a Southerner for political...
try to prevent a civil war.
Yeah, well, I mean, Johnson had not been Lincoln's running mate in 1860.
Right.
He had a different vice president for most of the war who was so unimportant that nobody even remembers who it was.
Who was it?
I actually, legitimately, I have to look it up.
Yeah, no,
because I don't remember.
Right.
Yeah. Anyways, Andrew Johnson became like Teddy Roosevelt, but different. Like he came in power because the president was shot, like McKinley.
Yeah, Hannibal Hamlin was the first vice president to Lincoln. He was a Republican, obviously. He was an opponent of the extension of slavery. He had been governor of Maine. He'd been a senator. And the reason that he was Lincoln's first running mate was that he had previously been a Democrat. So it was another compromise.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jacob says it could have gone either way. Lincoln was immortalized when he was killed. He may have messed up his legacy. Who knows?
I disagree with that. I mean, he kept the Union together, and the way we whitewash history, I don't see him being remembered badly.
Well,
I think that he's become sainted because of the assassination, but I also know what some of his plans for Reconstruction were, and think that he would have handled things so much better than Johnson versus the Radical Republicans did. Because it's not Johnson versus.
No, even the stuff that he had put in motion, they stripped. So it's just like, I mean, when I look at what happened the first 40 years following slavery, I'm like shocked that there's so many Black Americans still in the United States. It was brutal.
Yeah. Well, part of it is they couldn't afford to go. You know, if you are a cotton planter, you know, a cotton farmer on a patch of middle of nowhere Alabama, you can't afford to go down the road, much less out of the country.
Yeah.
And, you know, you do start getting the Great Migration when people are like, well, but the real problem is the South. Mm-hmm. And the real problem is not exclusively the South, but if I were a Black person living in the South, I know that I'd much rather have been in LA than in rural Mississippi.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they would have known that it was better out. I mean, I don't know. And then you get like very quickly get these communities, and where there's community, there's strength and comfort. So
Yeah.
yeah, it would have been easier if the South had just shipped them out. I think that would help. Not out of the country, but
Yeah.
to northern states that would have, or even, what was the Homestead Act was going on.
Yeah, no, and
They
there
just
are
moved on.
a lot of Black people who did take advantage of that. One of the weirdest acts of whitewashing in U.S. history is our view of the Old West.
Yeah.
I do a lot. I'm also an amateur historian, but my main thing is media studies.
Okay.
And watching Westerns is very weird when you are a historian. Yeah. Because it's like, oh, the only Chinese people in this movie are the ones running the laundry, and there are no Black people, and no, Hispanic people, and, the only immigrants are the Chinese people running the laundry. That's not what the West looked like, people.
Right.
Yeah, I think if Lincoln had, like about earlier, he was a lot of compromise stuff. I think, if I remember correctly, Johnson was more about forgive and forget, and the other side was about revenge. Got to have revenge with these people.
There is one person who was prosecuted for war crimes after the Civil War. And arguably, what happened under his control was he was of limited ability to do anything about. He was the head of the Andersonville prison. And it was not his fault that he had 4 or 5 times more people than his prison had been built to hold. He didn't control that. And it wasn't his fault that the entire South basically was starving by that point, and therefore they didn't actually have food to give to these prisoners.
Yeah.
There are things about how Andersonville was run that were his fault, but there are a lot that weren't that he was still held accountable for. But eventually, all of the leadership of the Confederacy was pardoned.
Mm-hmm.
And the officers were allowed to keep their arms and their horses and things. And there's a lot of that where it's like, I don't know if that was the way we should have handled it. But at the same time, what the radical Republicans wanted to do was basically grind the South into the earth.
Yeah.
And that's not historically the smart way to do things either.
No. It never really works out well for people when they try to do that.
That is long-term a terrible idea. I could list places where, there may be a little bit of issue in that in the Middle East right now.
A little bit.
Tiny,
Are you trying to say people hold grudges? People do that?
No, when you're trying to punish long-term, it never works out well long-term.
Yeah, well, especially because the people you end up punishing are very seldom the ones who are actually responsible for what went wrong. Grinding the South down the way the radical Republicans wanted to was not going to punish, Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee and all of the big names on the Confederate. It was going to punish the guy who joined the army because that's what somebody in Georgia did. And punishing both of those people to the same extent just creates resentment. And because, your poor Georgian is not going to be able to take out his frustration on the government in Washington, who he's going to be able to take out his frustration on is the black sharecropper down the road.
And thus began the rise of the first iteration of the KKK.
Yeah, exactly. The KKK is a definite outcropping of, this is why you did that badly. I'm not saying necessarily that I know what a perfect way of handling that situation was, because there isn't one. But I think Lincoln had some ideas that actually would have helped by helping the the freed slaves better themselves so that they weren't stuck sharecropping under the same people who had been their owners. Which is what happened, because one of the things that got stripped out of Reconstruction was any kind of systematic help to improve the lot of freed slaves.
Right.
Hey, this is still our land, but you can rent it from us for so much crops that we take from you.
Sharecropping was better than slavery, but not enough.
I'm saying, was that almost like what serfdom was in the time?
Sharecropping was basically serfdom. It was easier to run away as a sharecropper than it was as a slave. Nobody was going to forcibly bring you back from Chicago. And I specifically mentioned cities when I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you could also go to a city where it was illegal to be loitering while Black, go to jail, and then have the jail rent you out.
Yeah, no. And
also remember, even though a lot of the North hated slavery, that mean they wanted the Blacks to have same rights as us. Like, we're free now. We don't care about you now. Whatever.
Hating slavery and liking Black people are not the same thing.
Yeah, no, yeah.
The example I keep giving is it was literally illegal to be in Oregon while Black.
Yeah. They did not like Black people, did not want them in their state, could not buy land. Like, it was, And
I mean, there are communities in all kinds of states that were founded as Black enclaves by people who were often from the same part of the South. Sometimes even just the same plantation. And they would go to Oklahoma. They would go to, Florida. They would go to, hi, Tulsa. And found their own communities where they would interact with white people as little as possible. And you would have an entire town that was, the doctor, the lawyer, the whatever, were all Black.
Yeah, and you're free, but you can't come here.
Yeah. That started to lead to some class divides that are still kind of lingering. Oh, yeah. Alma, if you have a question, go ahead.
Yeah, also, wasn't there, I forget what it wasn't there like I remember I saw a video about this on the, one of the History channels, about like they called the Black Oklahoma or something, or whatever it was, the whole Black community.
Tulsa race riot.
Yeah, Black Wall Street.
Yeah. Race riot, heavily in quotation marks, you understand. It was not a race riot, it was a massacre. And
it wasn't the only one.
No. But
you may have heard of Rosewood in Florida. Yeah, every southern state had one.
Alumnus of my high school actually made a movie about Rosewood. He's our only famous alumnus.
Wow.
But yeah,
not even just southern states. So when Chicago, Philadelphia,
even during the war, there's some pretty horrific stuff that happened in New York, because of drafts. I don't want to claim the North as any kind of Eden,
right?
At all. But I can also understand wanting to get as far away as possible from at least the specific people who owned you.
And I mean, the thing is, and I'm not trying to say that the North was a Mecca. I mean, it was, we have story after story after story of Black people trying to buy a house, one Black family trying to buy a house with white people, amongst white people, and like just all hell breaking loose. You have the
Oh
Klan
yeah,
and the police, and the entire neighborhood just.
yeah. The
There
plot
were there were
of
times when people didn't. I mean, their house would be burned. A lot of times, whole families were. I say whole families, but like
yeah
people
the
died, children died. This is in the North for a
the
Black family moving in a white community.
mhm,
However, if we wouldn't have seen the same things,
yeah
I don't believe we would have seen the same things. The white people in the North were very much live and let live. What you saw in the South was Black people trying to live, white people getting jealous, saying, oh no, a white woman was essayed, and then them burning the entire town down.
yeah. Oh yeah, no. And often it would turn out that that was a lie in the first place.
Yeah, usually,
I may have
naturally.
just watched a documentary, short one, but a documentary about the Scottsboro Boys yesterday. So yeah.
I almost had a two comment question. Two comments.
Okay, yeah. So everybody has always been saying that it's always worse. Every generation has said that the new generation is worse than the one before. I personally am of the belief that slowly but surely we are getting better,
Mm-hmm.
but I am also aware of my privilege as a white person on this one.
We're better than we were. I'll say that as a Black person that can trace at least 4 of their grandparents back to slavery. 2 of them I know were the children of slave owners. So
Oh, yeah.
Oh
I gotta
my
say,
God. Go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of people just want some like Mama says, a lot of people want something to complain about. Like first it was you can't marry a Black person, then the 90s it was you can't marry a gay person. Now it's you can't be trans.
Yeah.
I need you to remember that we whitewash history.
We do.
Focus on the great parts. Like, see, look, the Supreme Court said the Black kids and white kids can go to school together, and we completely gloss over the fact that the Supreme Court also said that it was totally fine to put Japanese people in concentration camps.
Oh, did you hear they finally overturned that as official Supreme Court precedent like 3 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right around the time when we were getting a Juneteenth holiday.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, like,
okay, Omar, the concept of privilege. Now,
yeah, I mean, change is always we may think change has always been incremental. We haven't gotten these huge things, and a lot of times when we do get huge things, it means that they're going to try to take 3 other low-hanging things that we've enjoyed for a long time away, just out of bitterness and spite, because some people, I don't know what it is. They play to this zero-sum game, and if women are getting something, then we have to take something away because those haughty bitches are going to try to get too much. And this is just legit how some people think, and it's the world we have always lived in, at least in this this country, the United States. And so change has always been very slow, very incremental. I don't want to buy into the narrative, oh, it's always worked out in the end, because it always works out until it doesn't, this isn't the first time we've been on the brink of fascism. It could be the first time we slip into it. So like never rest on your laurels, but we are objectively better than we were.
My children's schools, they still say the pledge, which I have my feelings about.
Yeah, me too.
But in the same set of announcements as they say the pledge, every morning they do an acknowledgement of the fact that our schools are on Nisqually land. They acknowledge the people who were here before the white settlers came here.
Wow. That's really cool. So it sounds like you're not the only one who has a problem with saying the Pledge of Allegiance every day.
No, actually, I was at parent-teacher, like, back-to-school night or something for my son when he was in kindergarten, and one of the other parents asked if the kids were required to say the pledge because they weren't happy about it.
That reminds me of two things real fast. One, the pledge. I remember in the '90s, it was in one of my schools. One of the kids sat down. I'm like, wow, I thought that was a big deal at the time in the late '90s. Like, wow, he's saying the pledge. Isn't that like illegal or something?
No, Supreme Court says you don't have to stand for the pledge.
And also, also talking about saying our loyals and stuff. I have to admit, at the time that growing up in the '90s in Ohio, I thought, quote that racism was a thing from 30 years ago. It's all fine now. We're living in the '90s, '80s. We're all fine. Then I grew up in the 2000s, and it's like, wow, it's still happening. What?
So.
Actually, when you get done with that, I do want to answer Alma's question on privilege. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I am from the single most ethnically diverse part of Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
Everybody thinks of LA as being really diverse, and on paper it is. But if you look at actual census data about who lives where, Los Angeles is hugely segregated, except for where I'm from. Which is actually you have neighborhoods that are integrated. There were black families on my block and white whatever. So this is another one of those jokes that dates me. I used to say that my class in high school looked like a United Colors of Benetton ad. Because it was, I went to junior high or high school with someone from born on every continent but Antarctica.
That is awesome.
It's really awesome, and it gives you a fascinating perspective on the world.
Exactly.
How old were you during the '90s LA riots?
Oh, I was a freshman in high school.
I think I was a middle schooler at the time.
They shut down my school during the Rodney King riots and sent us all home.
Good for them.
The riots never got anywhere near us.
Still.
Because LA, spoiler, is really big. And the riots did not cover the entire city because that's literally hundreds of square miles. But also, I was on the last public transit bus north through Pasadena the day they shut down the schools for the riots. And you know the yellow line that you're not allowed to stand in front of? They didn't freaking care. If you fit on the bus, get on the bus. So that is also in my lived experience.
Wow.
And the thing is, one of my sister's teachers was the whitest person I've ever known. The guy was transparent. And he lived in, I want to say, Compton. And the thing, a really black neighborhood in LA, in Los Angeles proper. And privilege is, he wasn't going to get hassled by the police getting home.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't choose to go home because he felt that was a terrible idea at that time. He stayed with friends for those couple of days. But if he had gone home, he would not have been hassled by the cops. Because he was white. And a black person of the same educational level, of the same, class background, all of that, would have been hassled by the cops. And that is a moment of privilege. So what happened, the thing is Alma, is Los Angeles is more than one city. It's just 50 cities in a trench coat. So if you cross the street, you're in a different city in a lot of places. And people would move to a new place, but they still want to be around their old community. And so you get black neighborhoods and Vietnamese neighborhoods and Armenian neighborhoods and things like that, because they still want to be in they still want to be in their old community, but there's a reason they left their old community. And also, the white people who had money didn't want to let people of color into their neighborhood, which is, a thing even in supposedly liberal parts of the country. And from what I understand, that is not just a U.S. thing. I know it's a big problem in London, which last I checked was not in the U.S.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're talking about privilege as well, I guess white privilege. Um, let's break it down to privilege. Privilege is something that gives you a leg up on somebody else.
Yeah.
So, I know that I have pretty privilege. I know that I have money privilege. I know that I have, um, God, I'm trying to think
Cisgender.
of like, yes, I have cisgender privilege.
Yeah.
I actually am aro ace, but I don straight privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, I will say I'm straight because of the privilege that gives me,
Yeah.
in society, both professionally and personally,
You have passing
familially.
privilege.
Yes, um, passing privilege. Yes, thank you. Which I have a lot of trans friends now, and getting in the Black community, passing I do not have passing privilege, which
Yeah.
thankfully is not a required thing. I know a lot of people who could pass and choose to tell people that they have a Black parent instead, and I'm loving that. But you know, um, again, passing privilege means something very different than it does in the trans community, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
learning about that too.
Yeah, I've
So,
got a Black assigned female at birth trans friend who has masculine passing privilege. And
oh, nice,
and
nice.
he says that, you know, where he gets where he is changes how he gets treated, because he's also very femme, but
Okay, right.
he's got a beard. You know, he is
So,
very
yeah.
masculine, but he has a very femme vibe.
Mhm, mhm.
And how he gets treated varies a lot depending on the people around him.
Right.
Yeah, Andre, I'm
And
in
so
Olympia, actually. So,
a lot of people, when you're talking about I think people think that white privilege means like that non-white people think that all white babies get like $1 million right out of the hospital at birth. And
God, I wish. Speaking as
white
someone poor, God, I wish.
white
You mean I can
privilege
call us
does
all
not
the time?
necessarily mean money privilege. It can translate there, but due to unrelated, seemingly
Mhm.
unrelated things.
Yeah.
For instance, if you're like, let's say that me and Jillian both we're the same. We're the same age. We're wearing the same thing.
Hmm.
We walk in and answer the exact same interview questions the exact same way. White privilege is, and Jillian, I'm not saying you're white, but you're going to be for
I
the
am very
okay,
white.
beautiful. Okay, great. Thank you. I was like, I'm not going to assume, but if you want to out yourself, go ahead.
She's a dragon.
White privilege is and it is a statistical fact that in the
Hmm.
United States, Jillian is more likely to get the job, be accepted into the college, get the bank loan, you name it. Just all things being equal,
Yeah.
all things being equal, she is more likely to get the things that equate to money and a more easy lifestyle. And the white privilege, which is white privilege, also white privilege is her not knowing that or being able to be oblivious to me having to experience that.
Yeah.
And either not caring or choosing when to care about it.
Yeah.
So privilege, I think it gets really nuanced, but it's just that basic, all things being equal, Jillian's going to have an easier time
Yeah.
than
Speaking
Maya.
of privilege and stuff, it's relevant now since the Supreme Court is doing a lot of stuff of reversing and stuff that's happening. But like post Civil War, the first, I think I could be a bit earlier ones, it was that I forget what the actual ruling was in 1899 or something. The equal,
Plessy
but
v. Ferguson.
yeah.
Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal. Yeah. Until Brown versus Board of Education, which we talked about actually when we were talking comics, because the guy who wrote the anti-comics book was on the right side of that particular argument, but was basically like separate is inherently unequal. For a lot of people, yes, and for a lot of people, no. Like, there's a lot of not subtle racism, Alma. Like, I'm sure Maya has stories. I don't have firsthand stories, but I surely have seen it happen to people I care about. That, I actually know someone who won a lawsuit against the Seattle Police Department during the Black Lives Matter protest because of how the Seattle Police Department treated her.
So,
Spoilers, she's black.
so, if any at all, do you think religion at all plays any part of this racism divide, or is it a totally separate issue?
It's not. It does not map 1-to-1 because there are multiple denominations in the United States that split in the 19th century over the issue of slavery. Jimmy Carter, I will die on the hill that man is our greatest ex-president. Say what you want about what he did in office, but since leaving office, no one has outdone Jimmy Carter.
Fair.
Left the Southern Baptist Church because they're still as racist as they were in the 19th century, and he was just done.
I wish more people would do that. I actually, I grew up Catholic, and I was told that, to be a good Christian, you should be Republican.
Oh, Jesus. They didn't teach us that in my Catholic church.
That's one of the reasons my family left.
No. My family said that the church didn't rightfully took no religious stance. But
that's one of the reasons my family left the church, because they're telling us, "Hey, you gotta vote this way. You're not real Christian." And they're like, well,
yeah.
No, my Catholic, let's say my Catholic family, a Protestant, my dad's side was Catholic, and then everybody else was Protestant. And I remember growing up hearing that if you're a good Christian, you would vote Republican. And I didn't know what that meant, but I turned 18 and I registered Republican because that's what I was supposed to do.
Oh boy.
And I actually voted third party usually until I saw how the Republicans were treating Obama. And I'm like, you can't tell me shit. This is racist.
Yeah.
And I have been independent ever since. And it bothered me that more people didn't see it.
Yeah, I saw at a protest, 'cause I live in my state capital, so I've gone to a protest or two at my state capital. And I saw some years ago a Lyndon LaRouche supporter, and boy, that's a whole can of worms, with a poster with Obama in the stereotypical bone in the nose, whole 9 yards. And I was like, do you really think that is winning anyone to your side? And the guy was convinced it was. And that was when I walked away, because there are some people you're not going to win an argument with.
Yeah, I was still a full-time churchgoer during Obama's first election, and one of the major things I heard about that was, wasn't even the black issue. It was, they were saying he's Muslim or whatever.
Oh yeah, secret Muslim.
Yep, I remember that.
I mean, his middle name is Hussein, after all.
Yeah, no, it's obviously Muslim.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have seen a lot more racism since I moved to Washington than I did in Los Angeles because of the specific LA upbringing I had. And then I moved to rural Washington state. And a lot of the racism there was actually against a demographic that I didn't have a lot of familiarity with, because the Spanish killed most of the Native Americans in my part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of racism around here against Native Americans.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yep.
Like I said,
why? Like, what's
Well,
the
you see, they're still not right. Let's start with that.
Well, I mean, I know why you would want to other them, but like,
right.
What are the stereotypes? Like they're
all lazy. They're all drunks.
Okay.
I mean, never mind that, genetically speaking, alcohol has a different impact on people of Native American descent. But no, it's their fault. They're making bad life choices. They just want to get by on the money from the government. Whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier, I ignorantly thought growing up in Ohio, the northern state, like, oh, I'm a northern state. It's fine up here. Everything's cool. But then, like I said, the more I learned about my own classmates, how pro Confederate they were for this and that.
Yeah.
And I think, like, in religion, I might have to do with the fact that I live an hour away from the Creation Museum, give or take. I don't know if that's to do anything with it, but I live in the sphere of influence of that, unfortunately.
Yeah. The funniest museum within a couple of hours of me is there's a creationism museum down near Mount St. Helens. And one of these days I'm going to get a bunch of people and we're going to go. And we're going to film it and send it to Dapper. But, yeah, no. And the thing that is really important to remember about privilege is that it is an intersectional issue. You know?
Mhm.
Like, Maya and I have different ethnic heritage, but we are both women and both have to deal with the lack of privilege that comes from being women.
That's for sure.
And, you know, I'm a straight white woman and my best friend is bi, and she shares, despite being a white woman, shares privilege with our black male friend because, he is a pansexual trans man, and so where your privilege comes, one of the things, there's nothing wrong with being a woman, Alma, but women get less benefits in society than men do. It's one of those things that it's just statistically true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I have felt is my responsibility as a parent, you guys have seen Zane. Now, his hair is darker than it used to be. He used to have, swear to God, blonde ringlets. And he is cis. His answer to ask about his sexuality is, I'm 10. And that's a fair answer. But he has cis white male privilege.
Yeah.
And so for years now, I've been explaining to him that he has cis white male privilege and what his responsibilities are with cis white male privilege. Interestingly, he used to go to Garfield Elementary in Olympia, and Garfield is the first U.S. president who I think would have been actually glad to know that someone who followed him in the presidency was black. I think Lincoln would have thought it was inevitable. I think Garfield actually would have been happy about it.
Interesting.
Oh,
and then, I think another one, she was like, do you think that maybe racism is just more subtle than it was back in the day? Yeah.
Depends on who and where you are.
Right. Like, that one's hard. Racism's never gone away.
No.
Never. I mean, it's like they're just doing different things with the racism now.
Like, ask my friends of Mexican descent what they feel about racism these days. Because that's not subtle. A lot of what's being said about Mexican people, that's not subtle.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm grateful that the police stopped escorting the KKK to burn down like black houses.
Yeah.
But, I mean, then I don't really appreciate, the government, putting freeways through our communities, over policing them and like throwing away our black men, and then looking at the black women like, why can't you keep a man? And, you're the reason that you alone, black women, are the reason that your black communities are failing.
Yeah.
It just, racism just looks different now.
Yeah. Stop and frisk.
Oh God. Right.
That's an inherently racist policy under the guise of being law and order. What I do for my son is I say, look, if you are in a place where you think you can make a difference, it is your responsibility, because you have this privilege, to step up. If you don't think you can make a difference because, for example, you are 10, then what you can do is you can be supportive of one of his best friends is non-binary. He can use their pronouns.
Yeah.
He can make sure that they feel safe around him. He can make sure
He's such
that
a good mom.
Yeah. He can make sure that any people of color he know that he is safe for them to be around, and he's not secretly calling them names behind their backs.
Yeah. And I've been saying that so much lately. I think a lot of two white men. I'm like, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
Cis out white men, I really need you to step up. And it doesn't even have to be much. Just could you
Yeah.
not laugh at a joke, to be, just because you don't want to make waves, or could you, just even saying, hey, not cool. Like, you have no idea the weight that carries just coming from another cis white man.
The ever popular, why is that funny?
Right.
Make them explain that they're a bigot. Because they don't want to do that.
Right. It's just little things that you can do. And you can't be too male or too white or too cis to not make a difference in another.
And also,
if somebody is a bigot, someone coming from their same race, same gender is going to have the bigger impact than the person that they've othered.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to be that bridge to be like, no, they're valid. Listen to them.
I pushed back once on a former coworker of mine who posted something on Facebook about women be shopping.
Nice.
His response was to say that I had no sense of humor.
I would say also, sometimes never give up, because some people can change. My sister was one of the most Christian conservative people I knew for a long time, but especially even later, but even before this, especially after she found out how science backwards a lot of the church was about the vaccine and stuff, through that, and two, when my niece came out, she fully supported her. She's not a Muslim Christian as she used to be, but she's a little bit still. But but she's now in September. My niece is getting married,
that's so lovely.
I love it.
But if you look at things like expected lifespans, the expected lifspan of a black man and a white man in the United States should not be as different as they are. And that is racism. That stems from racism in policing, racism in schooling, racism in medicine. We are cutting people's lives short because of the systemic way we treat people based on the color of their skin.
Like, Alma, I think you live in Canada, right? Is it same or different up there than we're talking about down here?
Canada's different.
Canada's
on every level.
The running joke is that as a Washingtonian, I'm an honorary Canadian.
Can I be an honorary Canadian?
Unfortunately, honorary Canadian doesn't come with health care. It just comes with getting red-green show jokes.
Damn it. Okay, so the end goal is end racism. I don't know what that means. The end goal is equity, and that's what every movement says.
Yeah, end racism is broad, but there can't be a different end goal. And we can talk about the little steps we can work on to get to end racism, like ending stop and frisk. That's a nice goal. Or, make medical textbooks stop claiming that black people don't feel pain the same way white people do. That's a good end goal, or, a good little goal. But is things like that.
Not having black infant mortality, 3 times as high as white infant mortality, when under a white doctor. When infant mortality is cut in half when under a black doctor, something's going on. So there are things, and again, I don't mean to say that um, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans,
Mhm.
Americans with
Native Americans.
disabilities, yeah, they
Yeah.
trans LGBT Americans, like they don't have issues. I go with my strengths. My biggest things are women's issues, Black issues,
Yeah.
obviously. I like to speak for myself, and I play to my strengths because I don't want to straw man another
Mhm.
movement or anything like
Yeah.
that. So I apologize if maybe somebody thinks I'm on
Yeah.
this kick a little too much, but yeah, since you asked specifically about racism, there are a lot of things that we are asking for. We are asking for reparations, and reparations does not necessarily mean money. And actually, if you look at a lot of the reparations bills, it hasn't been checks to Black people. It's been to eliminate food deserts, to make sure that Black people have access to like better education. We're talking
Yeah.
about like free pre-K. There's been a big movement to have state funded schools and not zip code funded schools.
Yeah.
There to free public colleges or
Mhm.
at least community colleges. Um,
Uh,
help with home and buying homes.
yeah.
Um,
And
and getting
redlining,
businesses.
improve access to housing. Uh, School lunch programs.
Yeah.
Free school lunch
Free
programs.
school. My state just passed that free school
Yeah,
lunches.
we're my kids have been on programs where they've gotten the entire school on a free school breakfast and lunch. But
So,
our
yeah,
current school doesn't have that.
Yeah,
We
but there's
still
a
get it
lot of
because I'm
things.
poor. But
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with it's relevant right now because I think in a week or two is the Ohio primary. So
Mhm.
and the
Vote.
voting, one thing is voting locations.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Yeah. Stop the
Yeah.
gerrymandering. We
Oh, yeah.
have a
No,
ton
I'm
of things that we're
fortunate.
asking for. Nobody is just saying stop racism. We have a lot of thoughts. We have a lot of ideas.
Like I don't know if it's bad as in some Black communities, but I remember when I was first started voting, my polling place was like, this is also I'll talk this. Why is most polling places churches? I never understood that.
Because they're open and not busy.
True, I guess. But anyways,
and they're everywhere.
My first time voting, when I was 18, there's a church, a Catholic church, right next to my house, and I could go there to vote. But later on, everyone started going to a different, like the polling places and started getting a small, bigger range, I guess. Instead of local churches, it was one big church for everyone.
I had to wait.
Ours are always schools.
And,
I don't actually know where my polling place is, and I will tell you what. Oh no, I guess I go to the county voting center because my state is 100% vote by mail.
Yeah, but like I said, my first voting thing, I was in and out of there. The line was short line, whatever. During the 2016 election, during the Trump election, I waited an hour, 2 hours in line. I got there at 6 a.m. I didn't get out till 8 a.m.
Yeah.
Everyone was in the same place now instead of smaller locations.
We get our ballots, I forget how many weeks before the election, and you have that entire time to do your research and fill out your ballot. And there are drop boxes all over the county. The nearest one to us is at a fire station a couple miles down the road, but it doesn't even matter because your ballot comes with a postage paid envelope. So you can drop it in any mailbox. And they've been putting a lot of ads on YouTube lately about how we know that our vote by mail is safe. Because people are really freaking out about vote by mail these days, despite the fact that this is actually true. Do you know what the first election that had vote by mail was?
What? Where?
1864.
Wow.
The soldiers in the Civil War were the first people to vote absentee. And yeah, I absolutely trust the vote by mail system. It is phenomenally safe. Voter fraud stems much more from systemic issues like gerrymandering, which, if this is another I get to brag about being a Washingtonian, we have some of the most equitable precincts in the country. We are actually considered a model for other states to look up to in that department.
That's crazy. Yeah, but I'm sorry, I do need to get going, but I do want to just say we have had two huge pushes, or three probably. I know Bush didn't
Mhm.
believe,
Yeah.
and so he went through a huge, probably one of the largest recounts or whatever, like trying to
Oh
figure out
God,
where the
yes.
fraud was. I know that there's another one when Trump won in a lot of states. I know Jill Stein of the Green
Yeah.
Party, she paid for like a recount in all of the swing states. And then there's a big one this last time where red states just couldn't believe that Biden won. And I want to say almost every swing state was recounted at least
Mhm.
twice. And try as they might, we have never, ever in the history of the country found like just widespread fraud. And usually, even when people are intentionally vote, like double voting or whatever, it's like one
Mhm.
person in this one area. It's never enough. Like
Yeah.
when you look at all the voter, quote unquote, voter fraud or like the bad ballots across all the states, had they gone through, it wouldn't have either gone through or been thrown out. Wouldn't have been enough to sway the election.
Yeah.
Before you,
You can swing a local election probably. You can't, like, I mean, we're
You
talking like
could,
mayor of your town level
right?
local election,
Yeah, you
but you
could.
cannot swing a major election with voter fraud the way we've seen it in the United States.
Not in the United States. We're too big,
yeah,
and
before we wrap this up, Maya, uh, what's coming on your channel tomorrow and your Bad Science Sunday? Anything particular topic or any?
yeah, I need to get my thumbnail up so I can get the link out. But yeah, we are talking to a woman who wants to know about what will happen in the end times. So she asked Chat GPT.
Oh God!
Yeah.
Oh, there are layers to what's wrong with that.
We're going to go through all of them.
Yeah.
So at my Atkinson coming through
Her channel's
tomorrow,
description below. You want to click
9:30.
it. I said it earlier. You can check out Jillian's Patreon and Amazon wish list as well as mine. And on this chat we have the tipping thing. As for my channel, right now next Saturday it's less end times and more start times because we're starting the beginning of the universe after the first second of the universe, the first second to the first 100,000 years of how the universe was created, way before Earth was even a thing. So pre history. But anyways, do you guys have anything? Do you have anything you say in your closing catchphrases or anything?
Nope.
Subscribe.
Yes, sub.
Hit that like button.
As always, never stop learning and enjoy the randomness. I'll see you next week. Bye.
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 Stand by me. Woo!